Hmm. So just sharing some of the reading that I've been doing this past week, and I'm I'm still reading up on interoception and that way of sensing our body. And one of the things I find interesting is being able to see how research changes over time and the things that we learn. And way back when we knew that mindfulness changed the brain, and we could actually see changes in brain shape. But there was always, these hypotheses about, how it changes the brain. And then we learned a little bit more about, the vagus nerve. And this vagus nerve runs throughout all of our body and actually feeds back into the brain and controls a lot of that autonomic nervous system in controlling and soothing the body down. That feeds back into the brain, and it can actually change parts of the brain as this vagus nerve is activated. And one of the best ways to activate that vagus nerve is through the diaphragm. It's as the diaphragm is contracts and moves with our breathing, it feeds back into the brain, actually changes some of those relaxation responses, and the body relaxes. And so that's kind of been the framework that I've worked with for the past 10 years or so. And then adding in this new little bit of interoception. And this interoception also feeds into that vagal tone or into that vagus nerve and helps activate those different changes in the brain. And it's like this way of sensing into our bodies, into these little tiny, tiny areas of our body, feeling the nuances, is another way that we restructure our nervous system, our stress response, and actually change the shape of our brain. To me, that's really cool. It's like, oh, so paying attention to my hands can change my brain. That's really kind of fascinating. And one of the things that I've been learning about this interoception is that a lot of it, the nerve endings themselves, are in our fascia, which is the kind of the coating and the gooey casing around everything in your body. So it goes around your muscles, it goes around your bones, all of it. And so when we're sensing into those areas, like just under our skin, or sensing the slight little movements of the bones, like when we're paying attention to the ribs, and the ribs actually kind of like tilt out a little bit with the inhale and then come back down with the exhale. When you start to feel into those little tiny nuances, you're activating that interoception, feeding back into that increased vagal tone, going back into restructuring that stress response system in your body, and your brain changes. So for me, it's like it's really fascinating to see that link between feeling my ribs move and knowing that my stress response has been changed. So we're going to continue playing around with feeling the body, but really almost breaking it down into these little tiny nuances. And, one thing that can happen is when we don't move something, our brain loses its map of it. This is true that you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. True with muscles, it's also true with brain structure. So if you don't map these areas of your body, your brain forgets to sense them. And so this is why, if you pay attention to your back, there's some areas that you're aware of, and then some areas where you can't feel it all. You're like, oh, okay, my brain has lost the mapping of that area. And so we're going to just kind of play with sensing, sensing maybe up and down the spine of like, where can you feel? Where can you not feel? And just kind of like this little tiny micro changes in sensing the body. And of course, we're taking this mindfulness approach that says, whatever is here. There's no good or bad. There's no right or wrong. We're just getting to know it. We're noticing where we can feel, where we can't feel. And then also noticing the mind. If the mind wanders completely off, you notice it, you just redirect it back. That process of being able to notice you've been taken away, to disengage and return, That right there is the foundational key of mindfulness that gives us the power to choose anything. So that's one of those areas where it's like, even when your mind is wandering and you notice it and you bring it back to your breath, that is the practice of mindfulness. So, with that being said, we're going to go practice. And at any point, if you're like, I can't do this, this is like my brain can't even pay attention to these little nuances, you just go back to your breath. You just go back to breathing, just over and over again. All right. So, starting here, closing your eyes, beginning to shift that attention from paying attention to what's out there to noticing what's happening inside. Noticing the breath, the inhale and the exhale. Just as it wants to be right now in this moment. You don't have to breathe any particular way, it's all just breathing. Maybe starting with your nose and feeling the air right there at your nose. Maybe even noticing those little tiny movements at your nose, at your cheeks, the way your cheeks slowly drift apart and open on the inhale, relaxing back down on the exhale. And then following the breath down through your throat. Maybe noticing if your throat expands and contracts, or if there's just minimal sensation. And again, just bringing that sense of curious noticing to whatever you notice. And following the breath even farther down, feeling the collarbones, noticing the rise and fall of the collarbones as you breathe. And then going down into the chest, the upper chest, in the middle, all the way down to the lower parts of your chest. Just taking that moment to reacquaint yourself with your breathing, with your lungs, with your rib cage. There's no hurry, there's nowhere to jump to. Just that slow greeting, like hello. It's good to see you again, my dear breath. Maybe noticing the front of the chest and the ribs kind of open and expand away from the sternum as you inhale. Relaxing back down on the exhale. Feeling into the back, And the ribs where they move across the back, maybe all the way to the spine. And just noticing. I'm already beginning to notice where I can feel in my back and where I can't. I'm aware of the mid back as I breathe, the lower back. But I don't know if I can feel anything in my upper back right now. I'm just feeling curious, noticing. And then tracing with your awareness right along the edges of the ribs, from that point at the bottom of your sternum, along the base of your ribs, all the way back to your spine, where your diaphragm connects, separates your lungs from your lower torso. Maybe just feeling that little bit of tension right there at the base of the ribs. Maybe some of that pressure as the diaphragm pulls down on the inhale and floats back up on the exhale. And then dropping all the way down into the belly. Noticing the rise and fall of the belly as you breathe. Noticing if you can feel the movement down to your hips and your pelvic bowl, or if you feel it in the front of your belly or in the back towards your sacrum. And just letting the breath move. You don't even have to make yourself breathe. Your body will do it all on its own just for you. And letting the body breathe as it needs to breathe right now. And noticing what that pattern might look like. The breaths could be short or long. The inhale and exhale might be the same length, or they might be different lengths. And there might be a pause at the top of the inhale, or a pause at the bottom of the exhale. And maybe even just taking a moment to really appreciate that your body knows how to breathe on its own. It knows the rhythm of breath to give you right now. And just maybe that little bit of gratitude. Oh, thank you, breath. And then we're going to start playing with just those subtle nuances, beginning to reawaken the interoception in our bodies. As you've been taking your attention to your ribs, that's where we'll start in playing. And first, start to notice your sternum, that bone right there in your chest. And if it helps to feel it and feel over to where the ribs start, you can do that. Or you can just sense it, kind of sense. Like, can you feel the center of your chest? Can you feel the ribs moving under your arms? And can you work towards where those two meet? And just again, pure curiosity, no right or wrong, simply just exploring and experimenting. Can you notice that juncture between the sternum and the ribs? Maybe start on one side, the left side or the right. Start at the top or work down towards the bottom. I notice I can feel where those two meet up at the top near my collarbone. But then the farther down the sternum I go, the harder it is for me to sense right where those ribs are. And if I move over to the right side, I notice it's a little bit harder for me to notice than the left side is. Almost as if you're using your attention to walk, almost like walking fingers down that juncture point. Can you sense that slight, subtle shifting that happens as you inhale and then exhale? And then just taking a moment to appreciate, the subtle differences, what you feel top to bottom, side to side. And then maybe feeling down along the front of the ribs, down towards the bottom, towards the sides, where they kind of flare out and up with the inhale. Relaxing back down with the exhale. And almost, again, this really very subtle shifting. Can you feel those ribs as they kind of open out, almost like blinds on a window? And they can just kind of open a little bit, and then they close and rest with the exhale. And again, you might go from one side to another, really paying attention to the ribs on one side. And then on the other side. And as always, whenever the mind wanders, you just notice it and bring it back to the breath over and over and over again. Anytime it feels like you're concentrating really hard and you can't feel something, just kind of let it go. Take a breath. Relax. Just breathe. And then go back to just that subtle sensing, those little tiny changes. And then going back towards your spine. You might even take a big breath if it helps to really feel the muscles move, the ribs move, the back kind of expand on the inhale. It's hard to feel some of those places in the back. And so just getting curious. It's like there are some places I know very well. I feel that spot of tension all the time. And then there are other places that are big blanks. And so just beginning to feel into the ribs moving, the back moving. Perhaps starting as low as you can sense, whether that's in the sacrum, the low back. You might feel an actual movement that tips back towards the back of your chair with your inhale, and then a slow rocking forward with the exhale there in your low back. Or it might be a different movement, or no movement. Or it might just be a slight, subtle expanding that you notice as you breathe down that low. And then maybe going up to where your waist is, where the curvature of your spine starts to curve out back towards the back of your body. I notice I'm very aware of that little place, like right where the ribs meet or just below. It's almost as if the spine lengthens as I breathe in that place. And then again, almost as if you're finger walking up your spine, breathing up just a little bit higher. What does it feel like when you breathe into the mid-back? Can you feel the steps of the vertebrae? Like one rib, then the next rib, and then the next rib expanding. Or is there one point that really jumps out at you? Or a part that you notice that you just skip right over? No right or wrong. Just noticing, just being curious. In this moment, I just noticed that I'm focused mostly on the left side of my spine. I'm like, oh yeah, there's the right side. It wasn't grabbing my attention in the same way. So maybe even noticing if you're going up the middle or off to one side or the other. And then that place that's below your shoulder blades. Maybe even taking a breath into that place between your shoulder blades. Can you feel that part of your back expand and contract? What does it feel like to have those ribs just move a little bit around the spine? Maybe even noticing if you favor one side over the other. I notice as I get closer to my shoulders, the left side gets much tighter than the right. I'm feeling that place between the top of your shoulders all to your shoulder blades, that little slice there before you get to your neck. Maybe just noticing if it feels the same or different from other places in your back. I notice for myself the movement is much more subtle. I almost have to really, really pay attention for the subtle changes. Much smaller. And then going all the way up to the neck. And seeing if you can even feel subtle, slow changes there in the neck, just through the breathing. You can almost feel a small little pulse right there at the top of the spine. But then I completely skip over the lower parts of my neck. And then almost like shaking it off, letting your attention relax. Just taking that deep breath. Like, oh, I've just kind of remapped my spine for my brain. Just that's all that's needed. Again, just curious, just noticing, just kind of waking up that connection between the spine and the brain. Maybe just noticing how your body is in this moment. Like quick check in with your physical sensations, your thoughts, your feelings, and your breath. Just savoring your breath, breathing and sensing. Taking a few more breaths. When you feel ready, opening your eyes.